Welcome back. You're watching Australian Agenda. We're speaking now to Senator Sam Dastyari, who chairs the Senate's Economics Committee, former New South Wales Secretary of the Labor Party. Thanks for your company.
Great to be here, Peter.
I want to talk to you about banking reform. There's been a lot of controversy surrounding particularly Commonwealth Bank, but to a lesser extent ANZ as well. Before getting into the specifics of that, we've had Tony Sheldon sitting here in that chair before, senior member of the Labor Party's organisational wing, calling for a super profits tax on the banks. Is that something that is even in the mix as far as Labor's concerned?
No, I don't think that's the right issue. Look, the issue with the banks, Peter, is essentially this: the Australian banking sector is an incredibly profitable space, and it's profitable because it has the trust and confidence of Australian people. And it's profitable because there's a regulatory system that's been created to really prevent any real competition. So when the banks are in trouble, like they were in the height of the GFC, the Australian public to the government turn around and give $600 to $700 billion deposit guarantee to protect them. But you look at the behaviour of the banks.
Isn't it as much about the government protecting itself in the eyes of the people rather than the banking sector necessarily?
Not quite. I mean, look, the Australian banking sector has been incredibly profitable, and it's an incredibly successful part of the Australian economy. That's not a bad thing. But with that comes a responsibility the banking sector has to the Australian public and the Australian community that they're just not meeting at the moment.
How so?
OK, give you an example. You look at how they're treating customers, particularly those that are subject to, corporate collapses or dodgy and bad financial advice, how they're treating people, how Commonwealth Bank, how ANZ, how the big banks are treating their own customers. And I'll give you two very quick examples. Timbercorp Finance. Timbercorp Finance and secondly, Great Southern. Both of them were these kind of forestry managed investment schemes that went belly up in 2008. Timbercorp could not have existed if the ANZ Bank wasn't pumping hundreds and hundreds of $1 million into it. Now you have a situation where there is up to about 3,000 people who look like they may be losing their homes, where writs are being issued, and yet you've got the ANZ Bank last week comes out and announces a profit of $7.11 billion. At the same time, you've got up to 3,000 families who are sitting there waiting for their letter to come from the liquidator saying they're going to lose their homes when the ANZ Bank went in there and made so much money out of Timbercorp.
So what should they do?
I think the Australian banks need to do a much better job at restoring the trust and confidence of the Australian public. And I think the way to do that is a little bit of goodwill and a little bit of demonstration of a little bit of heart, a little bit of compassion. And I think the Australian banking sector is really damaging itself by not going out and taking these steps.
Well, now, to what extent have you discussed this with the banks or with senior bank executives? And what sort of response have you got? Well,
let's just say I'm not on their Christmas card list this year. Last week we announced that we're calling in the chairman of the Commonwealth Bank, David Turner. He's the person ultimately responsible. I mean, look at the Commonwealth Bank.
You mean for your committee?
For our committee, to a hearing.
Has he agreed to that?
Well, look, we've written to them. Informal conversations said that they're going to be happy to attend. We'll wait to see what happens. You know, as you know, we have the power of subpoenaing witnesses. The great thing about having the power of subpoenaing people is often you don't actually have to use it. Just having it there is quite useful. But the Commonwealth Bank, Commonwealth Financial Planning, up to 400,000 potential people could have been involved in it. And the CommBank itself still hasn't written to its own customers. I mean, how do you not write to your own customers and say, hey, you may have been subject to some fraud, and what was going on at Commonwealth Financial Planning, frankly, is criminal, and people like myself have called for a Royal Commission into it. How can you not even write to your own customers? And the Commonwealth Bank hasn't done that.
OK, well, I guess the question is, what sort of leverage does government have over the Commonwealth Bank and over the other big banks? That is, are you essentially saying, look, you are not honouring your social contract to the people, to your customers? Do you just urge them to do it, or do you take punitive action against them to improve their own behaviour?
Well, look, firstly, I don't think the first response to everything should necessarily be regulation. We have an incredibly effective, successful regulatory system in this country. We have brilliant regulators who do an amazing job. I think what we're saying in the first instance is that the banks have a social and moral responsibility, and it's also in their own commercial interest to maintain their trust and confidence.
So if it's not regulation, what is it?
I'm saying they're not meeting it, and I think the first thing that we have to do is start going out there and urging them to step up, urging them to treat these victims better. I mean, on one hand, they turn around and they go to the black letter of the law, whenever it comes to the tough times for the consumers, and during the good times for them. And when the reverse is there, they're the first people at the door asking for government to help them out. The Australian public can't and won't be expected to always be there to support them when they treat their customers like this.
You just said that you don't think that regulation is necessarily the answer, but if the banks don't come to the party, what is the answer?
Well, look, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that if we go out there and we start making this case and we start actually urging them to take more responsibility and we show them that it's in their own interest, that they're going to come to the table. What I wanted to come here today and announce is, so we've already called in the chairman of the Commonwealth Bank. On the 12th of November this month, 9 a.m. at the Town Hall in Melbourne, we're also going to be calling in senior executives of the ANZ Bank and forcing them to actually meet with and talk to and hear directly from some of the victims of the Timbercorp financial crisis, and actually have them have their stories told.
This will be via your committee?
This will be via the Senate Economics Committee. Letters are going out tomorrow morning.
How will that work?
Well, it'll be a public hearing. We're inviting the ANZ Bank, we're inviting the Court of Mentha, who are the administrators which are effectively appointed by ANZ, to come and sit there, and we'll also be inviting some of these victims and the victims groups to come and tell their stories. And you've got to say, this is harrowing stuff. The stories about what these people are going through. You know, people losing their homes, marriages that are breaking down, people sitting there waiting to get the letter that tells them that they're going to lose their own family home. In the same time as you've got ANZ Bank executives, bragging about how they made $7.11 billion of profit.
What are you hoping to achieve by getting them there? Is this a public shaming, or is this about them becoming more responsive so you don't have to go down the regulatory path?
I don't believe we should have to go down the regulatory path. I don't want to go down the regulatory path. And I think bringing them to the table is the way in which you avoid that. What we're calling on them is pretty simple. When it comes to these corporate financial collapses, especially in these forest management investment schemes, Timbercorp's the ANZ one, Great Southern's, Bendigo and Adelaide Bank, what we're saying is show a bit of heart, show a bit of compassion, and also take into consideration the circumstances in which people found themselves in debt, not just the debt they're in.
And what's the reaction that you're getting from other members of the committee? Obviously, you're the chair, but there's other
incredibly
political
supportive.
facets.
On the 12th of November already, the National Party Senator John Williams is coming down. Bill Heffernan from the Liberal Party is going to come down as well and kind of participate in it. The Deputy Chair of the committee, Sean Edwards, has been incredibly supportive. Look, this is not just about party politics. It goes a bit beyond that. This is about holding the Australian banking sector to account and making them responsible. They can't just be profiting from all of this and not have any responsibility for the damage that's done.
The argument that they might run, though, would be that at the end of the day, whilst I hear what you're saying about possible regulation, but you don't want to go down that path, the effects or the payback required for the bank guarantee, a banking executive is going to sit there and say, well, hang on a second, our primary duty is to our shareholders, and if we're rolling over on something that we think we have a legal right to hold the line on, however controversial it might have been, they are not putting their shareholders' best interests first if they do give in to what you see as perhaps a social responsibility.
Okay, two things on that. Where I disagree is by saying, and I say to the bank executives, that the trust and confidence of the Australian people in the banking sector and maintaining that trust and confidence is incredibly important for their profitability and the contract between the Australian public and the banking sector. I'd say that that's a priority that they should be protecting. But second, let's be clear about what we're asking for. We want them to make sure when the banks themselves have made hundreds, millions of dollars out of these investment schemes that effectively towards the end of it became Ponzi schemes, to be going out there and calling in these debts of small families that are struggling, a lot of whom got sold dodgy financial advice in financial advice practices. I mean, it's a whole different debate. But what happened in places like Timbercorp is now illegal.
Do you want them to actually reverse what they've done in relation to people who've lost money? Do you want them to change the policy to compensate or whatever?
Yeah, what I want them to do is this. In circumstances in which people found themselves in this debt through no fault of their own, through dodgy financial advice and bad practices, considering they were the ones that were funding Timbercorp Finance in the first place, they were the major financial backers, that for those people, they should be forgiving the incredible amount of interest, 13% a year that's been developing, and go just back to taking the principal.
So you want a policy change?
I want the bank to come to the table and say, we have made enough money out of these people. We have made enough money over the years from these dodgy financial schemes, these forestry management investment schemes, and frankly, we're going to reset the debt back to the principal.
Now, would you agree that the technique that you're actually using here, that you've just described, is naming and shaming as far as the banks are concerned?
Well, look, I've had half a dozen private meetings with the ANZ. I've had the Deputy CEO of the ANZ on the phone to me. I've had senior management, senior executives. I've had repeated meeting after meeting. And frankly, they think the idea, they've pretty much told us to go away. I mean, they leave us with no option than to go down this public path.
So they've told you to get lost?
Well, they've met with us, right, and they've spoken to us. But frankly, their view is the black letter of the law, in their opinion, says that they're not responsible and they don't want to have to pay.
So what's your response to this?
Well, my response is exactly what I'm doing, saying that, frankly, these stories need to be told. When you hear the stories of these victims, when you hear these harrowing tales, your opinion changes. I spend my days responding to emails, responding to phone calls, talking to people about what's going on here. And I've got to say, for someone who I thought I was a bit of a tough man because of my time in New South Wales Labor politics, I've become a complete softie on this stuff. And it changes you because there's real people here, real stories. And there's a disconnect between these stories about what's happening in these families, the divorces, the people who are living on the edge at the moment, mental health and all this.
Essentially what you're telling us
and $7 billion of profits last week.
Essentially what you're telling us is that you think the behaviour of the banks is arrogant and contemptible. That's what you really...
Arrogant,
would you
contemptible
agree?
and
Yes.
unconscionable.
Okay.
And if they tell you which pond to go jump in again, based on your discussions up till now, despite having this public hearing, where to from here?
Well, look, I don't know the answer to that. I think where to from here is about, at some point, I believe the Australian public are going to turn around to the banking executives and say, frankly, it's not good enough. We can't always be there for you and you never be there for us.
Just want to clarify, you've addressed this, but just to clarify this directly, is this a Labor Party bank bashing exercise?
No. No, and it's not just it's not just a matter for the Labor Party. As I said before, there's the National Party, there's the Liberal Party. I think this is bigger than that, and I think it's above just party politics. This is about us saying there is a social, moral, corporate responsibility that's not being met.
Senator Sam Dastyari, I appreciate your time on Australian Agenda. Thanks very much.
Thank you.